Welcome to the first class of the TAA Writing Gym. I am the prize, Create Goals That Move You Forward, presented by Susan Robison. In this class, you will learn how to create a workout plan with effective writing goals that will keep you moving forward. Susan will also share suggestions for writing warm-ups, as well as how to create cool downs that will set the bar for your next writing session. Hello, Susan.
Hello, Kim. Thank you very much for the honor of inviting me to be one of the presenters for this fabulous program, this summer program of Writing Gym. I think it's going to offer faculty, writers, textbook and academic authors many, many options for how to recraft their work habits, their behaviors, and their crafts. I'm talking about goals, so I should start with some goals that I have for this session. I'm going to begin by giving some suggestions on how to improve your writing workouts with warm-ups and cool-downs. We'll do a brief warm-up at the beginning, and we'll do a brief warm-up at a cool-down at the end. I'm also going to go through some steps on how to create, curate, discern, manage, and execute goals. I'll give some suggestions for how to set up accountability with yourself and or others. And also I'd like to hit a couple of points at the very end about common obstacles that I hear from academic writers and how to prevent those problems before they even get started. And at the very end, I'm going to remind you to reward yourself both in the short term for small writing goals and in the long term for bigger goals that you complete. So using this writing gym metaphor, we're going to start with talking about warm-ups. And just like the athletic experts tell us, you need to stretch and move your muscles before you actually do your workout. And it used to be that you would do that very vigorously, and then the technology on that has changed to recommend that you do it more gently. So we're going to gently ease into writing with our writing warm-ups so that we don't have to think too hard, but so that we do get the blood flow going to the parts of our brain that will be used for our writing sessions. I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions, and then we'll do one warm-up for today's session. So if you'd like to journal, journaling is a good way to start. You can be recording how you feel about your writing, where you are with the writing, anything around the writing that could be a journal entry into a writing journal or a journal that's just your life journal. I like to think of prompts, and I'm going to give you a prompt in a couple of minutes. Prompts are sort of open-ended sentences with a fill in the blank. Some common ones that are good have to do with how you're feeling about the current piece that you're working on. So I like working on this because, or I'm having trouble because. And so that's a shorter, perhaps, writing exercise than the journaling, but the prompts can also go on for a while, and the idea is to free write and warm up your brain at the same time that you're attending to what are some of your interests and concerns about your piece. I suggest to some of my faculty writers that they occasionally write an Antilles letter. What I mean by that is if you had an Antilles who cared about you but was not in your academic discipline, and you were going to write her a note about how you're doing with your writing, you would drop down to some sort of lay language to describe what you're doing and get out of the technical jargon. The reason for doing this, even though you probably are writing to those who are interested in the jargon, is that by dropping down to that least common denominator language, you're articulating exactly what it is you're working on. And sometimes when we get so into our jargon, we go down a rabbit hole and get lost in the content. And the Antilles letter will pull you back out to a more comprehensive overview. I personally like to start with mind maps. You can do them by paper or electronic. This is where you write a topic in the middle of a piece of paper, an 8.5 by 11 paper if you're doing it on paper. And then as a hub might have spokes, you start to draw lines away from the middle, writing on each line your most important concepts that will go into the piece that you're working on. Whether it's a chapter or section, you can mind map on a macro or a micro level. And then off of those spokes, some smaller branches with the smaller points that you'd like to write on. There are electronic programs to do that. I'm a fan of some of the research that shows that writing instrument to paper is often a better medium for most people's brains. And I personally use pencil so I can erase and move things around and not make it look too messy. My handwriting is messy enough. And I print on my mind maps. So here's our writing warm-up for today. I'm suggesting a prompt that says what I most need to learn about writing goals today is. So this writing warm-up is actually about this segment, this seminar. And I'm going to move on and continue with the conversation around the concepts that I have for our goals. But because you have the luxury of listening to this on your own time, you can hit the pause button, do some writing if you wish to experience this writing warm-up, and then go back to the list of the suggestions I gave you for some other write-up warm-ups for your real writing sessions. So you probably would expect that I'm going to give some rules about goals. However, I'm going to quote Doc from Back to the Future and say, where we are going, there are no rules. Instead, the rules that I'm going to give you will suggest that you find your own path. Sometimes you even create your own path through the woods. And my job, I think, is to give you some suggestions to try rather than some hard and fast advice that may not work for you, so that you take the suggestions and everything from the writing gym and customize it to make it work for you. Our first step then around goals are to create and curate your goals. So they're going to suggest that you dream big. You can always get specific later, but if you start small, it's hard to go the other way. So by dreaming big, I mean to ask yourself questions like, if time and money were no object, how would this fill in the blank article, book, essay, blog, etc. Actually turn out? How would I want it to be? What would it involve? And then you can always scale back to more practical and realistic things. You want to be sure to catch every dream that you have, even though you might not commit to them. You just want to catch them, because once they kind of waft through your brain, they may be gone forever. So you want to have some system. You can catch this in paper or electronic systems, and I'm going to show you in a minute how to discern which ones you're going to turn into actual goals. But the dreams are more broad, more general, more unspecific, and oftentimes are uncommitted at the time when they come into your brain. You might be reading something, talking to somebody, and then you have this, maybe someday, and it doesn't mean that you're going to do it. So I'm separating out here dreams from goals. Personally, my best system is to carry stacks of the tiniest little sticky notes and a writing instrument. And I have one in my car and one in my nightstand in my office, in the kitchen, etc. So that when a dream occurs to me, I can capture it on the sticky note. And then I collect these and transfer them over into a device I'm going to show you in a minute. In my workshops from the Peak Performing Professor book and the workshops of that title, I teach people how to set up a life management system, and I suggest that they get a dream book or an electronic version of this. In the system I teach, the people write their life purpose statement, their mission. They can write to professional or a second one for personal. And then they have a table of contents that are much more creative than the vision statement 1, 2, or 3. The vision statements might be about their fitness goals. It might be about their writing. It might be about their teaching. It might be about family and friends. And then the colored pieces of paper represent the chapters for each of those vision statements. That's where I stick the sticky notes on. And then they're parked there, and then gradually I can go back, I'll show you in a minute how to do that, and decide which ones are worthy of working on. Just so you know that not only do I teach this, but I also do this. Here is a photo of my own dream book, open to some pages. The upper right-hand side has the small sticky notes that I've captured. Looks like kind of a little messy, but it's an organized chaos. The lower left is important because that is the back of another piece of paper in the same chapter. And on those stickies, I have written goals and then move them to the back when I finish them. This is invaluable for two things. Many academics have to turn in annual reports, and it's easy to forget what you did in September if your annual report is in June, or what you did last year if it's due in January. Secondly, there are many times in your career where you need to rewrite your CV, including for a book proposal or a grant proposal or a job change. And reading your book backwards will help you on that task quite a bit, because again, you're going to forget what you've accomplished within a small period of time, let alone a bigger period of time. So how do we then take some of these dreams and turn them into goals? Well, a series of questions might be useful. I'm going to suggest some, but I bet you're going to come up with ones that are not even on my list. Why would I want to do this project? The pros and cons. How excited am I about it? If I'm not excited about it, why am I doing it? And particularly for a book, you're going to be living with that project for a long time. You need to have some passion around it and to be really looking forward to seeing it in print. What will it do for you professionally and personally? Will it help you get your next promotion? Will it bring you some fame and fortune? Will it bring you satisfaction that you've written something that is helpful in your field? And what are you willing to trade for it? You're going to spend a lot of time and energy on this project, and you're going to give up other projects and other opportunities, which costs you those opportunities in order to devote your time and energy to this project. So you have to begin to think of it as a trade-off. And lastly, is this the right time for the project? So in terms of everything else that's going on in your life. Well, once we have these dreams to goals, you're going to get clear about why you're doing the project. You can more easily decide whether you want to actually write on it, and the project is going to go better because you're going to have a very full commitment rather than something half-hearted. After you get your goals, you need to manage them. So we're going from those dreams to the goals to the very small goals, or I'm going to call them tasks. They're like sub-goals, little tiny goals about the tasks. You need to think about the scope and the time frame. When are things due? How do you want to turn it in? What are the stages? You need to go from the big picture of the dream that you have to the smaller picture of some sections of that dream or goals to the teeny tiny little picture, which are the small subtasks. And to do this, I'm going to suggest something that's quite counterintuitive, and that's that you plan backwards. I first learned this from a book called Wishcraft, and Scher and Gottlieb are the authors of that. It's an old book. It's probably very out of print by now, but it was a startling thought for me. And initially, if it's new to you, it's going to scramble your brain, much like the first time you ever saw Michael Jackson doing the moonwalk. It looks like he's walking forward, but no, wait, his feet are going backwards. And in fact, he's moving backwards. How is he doing that? That's a little how this is going to feel, but I guarantee if you experiment with it very quickly, it's going to become second nature for you to start thinking this way. So I'm going to show you some steps. Start with the end in mind and describe what this piece of writing is going to be like when it's finished. Then plan every small step, but plan it backwards. It's counterintuitive. You would think you'd start at the front, but this is going to be much more effective and guarantee that you don't run out of time. It'll also give you a task management system immediately. As you're doing the planning, it creates it simultaneously. You want to break each task or each goal into the tiny 15 to 30 minute subtasks that you can do so that you can write while you're waiting at the dentist's or while you're waiting to pick up your daughter from her soccer game. And these subtasks are easier then to manage than these great big goals. You're going to track the completion of each subtask by crossing it out or some electronic version of this. So let me show you how I would set up a tracking sheet to do this. I'm pretending we're working on an article, and I'm pretending we have a timeline, which is unrealistic for most academic articles, but I'm going to pretend it's 4 weeks, just so the math comes out and I can explain this briefly to you. The last step is to submit to the editor, so that's our finish step. We ask the question prior to that, what's at the 3/4, and that's to revise it. We're going to ask at the halfway point, what might I be doing then? I might be collecting colleague feedback so that I can then take that feedback into my revision process. And our beginning might be to mind map, create an outline from the mind map, write a draft, send to the colleagues. And any of these steps could be moved anywhere. And these steps aren't necessarily the ones that you're going to use. I'm just showing you an example. So let's imagine that you did that and you have a second article going at the same time. Notice how I did this. My finished is not totally finished with the article. It's finished for this unit of time, which I'm pretending is the 4-week period. At the 4-week period, I want to be analyzing my data, which means the week before, maybe even months before, I'm collecting data, and I might be starting with a mind map. And notice for this article, I'm not writing anything in that first week. So I'm on a slightly different timeline than I was with the first article. And as I unfold this, you'll see what you do with all of this. Then I'm pretending I'm working on a chapter for a book. So in the same time frame, I've already got some writing done on this book, maybe at this chapter 3. I'm going to present this to the writers group. Going to then start incorporating the suggestions, and then I'm skipping a step because I have a very busy week that week. But the next week I'm going to revise, and then I'm skipping another step, but I might write some things that need to be done, particularly you'll see on Article 2 in the last column, which I've added here, called the parking lot. And that's where you park the extra steps because you're not finished with the project. And you keep moving them over as you create another vertical column and you strip off and throw away the first column. And meanwhile, you can color code these and so on as you complete them. Now, I know I'm going through this very quickly, but the beauty of this writing gym is that you can go back and listen at your own time. So notice there's a personal project here, building a deck. So this mythical academic writer is also going to build a deck, and when you have time, go look at the steps that he's putting into this deck so that he can see how that's going to develop. All your project, personal and professional, can then be stored in one place. And the tracking sheet has the advantage over calendar is that it will show you the conflict of tasks that never appear when you just do due dates. What I've done here is put together the whole thing, and I've shown you by arrows that you now have a to-do list for the entire week. You no longer need daily to-do lists on anything in your life. It all goes on the same tracking sheet. And you don't need those little scraps of paper. You'll still need your sticky notes or some electronic equivalent, but all your goals for each project for that week, including some blanks like on Article 2, are all in one place where you can see your vertical list. Here's another technique for some accountability to yourself, and I use this with my book. I don't usually on smaller pieces, but I really found it invaluable in writing my book, and that's to keep a log of the days, the pages, and the notes. So it would go something like this. Let's say you were working on an introduction to something. You put the date, you estimate how much time you think it's going to take, and when you're finished with it, you watch the clock and you look at how much time it did take. And you'll see also how much time how much productivity. So measure that in pages or some kind of equivalent that you devise. And then you put some notes together for what you accomplished and what you're going to do next. And I've given you 2 examples of notes that you can look at by pausing your button. Sometimes you might want accountability to others. So some support of others that I would suggest, writers groups, a writing partner that you get together with and you sit and write. And you can even do this with an online buddy. You send each other an email and say, I'm going to start writing now, me too. And then you check in with each other at the agreed upon end point. Your own relationship partner can be a good accountability buddy as long as you define what you need from your partner, whether it's feedback or just encouragement. And certainly professional writer coach, of which there are quite a few wonderful people who belong and are on the lists for TAA. So you might think about a fee-based relationship with an actual writing coach, if that kind of accountability would be helpful. I'm going to suggest a couple of problems that we would want to prevent. And so as we move towards the end, I'm going to talk a bit about over-planning by just giving you a brief review of Hofstadter's law. Doug Hofstadter is a cognitive scientist who said goals always take longer than you expect. And he went on to have a couple of other ideas too. So I'm going to suggest that you can counter this by using that log to see how long tasks actually take. If I always estimate 20 minutes and it takes an hour, then I need to multiply my estimates by a factor of 3, and that might be consistent for how I work. So here's an example in brief of that log. Hofstadter said goals always take longer than you expect, even when you take into account Hofstadter's law. And as his career continued, he said goals always take longer than you expect, even when you are Hofstadter. So how to prevent procrastination? Procrastination is not a bad thing, but you can prevent it by using some if-then statements. So if it's Tuesday and it's 10 o'clock, then I'm writing, and I'm planning for when, where, and how. I'm also planning for how I'm going to prompt myself to get into the writing, such as I'm going to write right after finishing a meal, or I set a timer while I'm grading papers. When the timer goes off, I turn my attention to the writing. And this is a way to ease yourself into the task. And lastly, the other problem area that I see are what I call misguided assumptions. One of the most common ones I hear is I call the cabin in the woods myth. If only I could write a cabin for fill in the blank, something like a week, a month, a semester, and people would bring me food and no one would bother me, I would get my writing done. Now, the reality is if you break your tasks into 15 to 30-minute tasks, you can write anywhere in small chunks, like a mouse eating his cheese. Beware the everything will be smooth myth. Instead, plan for the obstacles, such as if you have out-of-town visitors, you're probably not going to get much writing done that week. So give yourself permission to take a break, but make sure you have some intentional if-thens for when you start back in. And the last myth is the writing is easy myth. Of course it's easy. You just stare at the screen or paper until beads of blood appear on your forehead. Many professional writers have had that observation. Really, writing's not easy for anyone, but it does get easier with regularity and feedback, and I think this writing gym is really going to help you. So how do you stretch and relax your writing muscles? You might write in your log. You might leave some cracker crumbs about how to get back into where you were. Set your next step goals, and be sure to reward yourself. Reward yourself with things and experience that increase your joy. Reward yourself with small things for the small step. If you get a part of your writing done during the day, maybe an ice cream cone after dinner might be a reward. And you might have bigger rewards for bigger steps. When I turned in my first draft to Josie Bass Wiley on the Peak Performing Professor, I took myself and my husband to Kauai, and this is a picture of Hanalei Bay while we were on that trip. So how do we cool down at the end? How do we transition back into regular life from the writing? And I'm going to suggest that today's cool down, which you can pause and spend a minute with it if you wish, is one thing I will do as a result of today's session. If you pick just one thing from each of your 6 sessions that you're going to listen to, you're going to have a fabulous collection of 6 new things that you want to do. Perhaps it will be 6 reminders of things you already do. Don't aim too high in what you're going to learn in the writing gym. There's so much information available in these resources. So be moderate in what you expect of yourself. It doesn't need to be another set of tyrannies of shoulds. Some chapters on making and tracking goals and accountability are in my book, and if you need some of the other resources I was citing as we went along, you can write to me at this address, and I think Kim's going to tell you how you can get in touch with me through the Writing Gym. So my goal for you is a great Writing Gym experience and continued writing success. Thank you very much for being with me in this seminar.